Space! Yesterday, NASA's Perseverance rover landed on Mars. And this is pretty exciting. And the way this thing worked was really quite impressive. It came down on a heat shield first, and then slowed down by a parachute, and then was lowered from a rocket crane by a cable to the Martian surface, and then the crane detached and flew off and crashed into the mountains somewhere. This is an impressive feat of technology because it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of moving parts that all had to go exactly correctly, and well, everything seemed to turn out perfectly. So that's great. We've got now 5 rovers on Mars. It's very impressive that we're able to, as human beings, send pieces of technology to another planet and get information back from it. This particular rover is carrying a couple of very cool experiments, including a snazzy helicopter. Basically, it's a prototype that's going to be used potentially on future missions, where it's a helicopter that's able to float around in the Martian atmosphere to do more reconnaissance. Basically, just to be able to get up in the air, do some aerial reconnaissance, see more of the planet than you can from a terrestrial robot. It's also setting up the conditions for a sample return mission sometime in the next decade or so. The Perseverance rover will be able to go and collect a surface sample and process it and hold on to it until we're able to send another lander which will be able to return it back to Earth so that we can analyze it. This will be really quite cool because we'll be able to get a fresh piece of Mars so that we can analyze it, figure out what Mars is made of, figure out what sort of composition the rocks have, and potentially from that be able to discover what the history of Mars was like. And this joins several other robots and other spacecraft that are studying Mars, from several reconnaissance orbiters to several more landers and other rovers that are on the surface, and I'm sure there will be more yet to come. Already we've learned quite a bit about Mars. It seems to have had a history much like Earth's. In fact, several billion years ago it even had flowing water on the surface more than likely, and also likely an atmosphere. Now mind you, a lot has changed on Mars. Given that Mars has a much lower mass, the core of the planet eventually froze, which caused a lot of the geological processes that keep Earth habitable to stop, and as such Mars lost most of its atmosphere and most of the water is now frozen under the surface. But even still, there is some evidence that there is still water there, and as such, given its past, it's possible that life could have formed there at some point in the past. And for that matter, it's unlikely, but possible that life actually originated on Mars, where the original microbes that created Earth's terrestrial life may have formed on Mars, and then a planetary meteor impact ended up shooting those over to us here on Earth. I'm not sure if I believe that exactly, but it's possible, and for that matter, it's possible we might find either some evidence of life, or even still some existing life, somewhere hidden under the surface. That would be really cool. But I think the main purpose for all these explorations, for all this study, for all these expeditions, is the possibility for an eventual human exploration, where we'll eventually send a bunch of human explorers, astronauts, to go and visit the Martian surface. We'll set up a science outpost and do some science on the surface, collect and analyze more rocks, do some more in-depth study that a robot just can't really do. We've got some impressive technology, impressive robots, and artificial intelligence and robotics are improving all the time, but still, and I think for a very long time, it will be possible for humans to do much, much more than a robot actually can. The main issue being that there's this light delay between Earth and Mars of around 11 minutes it was today, but sometimes it can be upwards of an hour. And so any signals that we send to and from Mars, there's a significant delay between the time when we send that signal and get it back. So we can't control any probes in real time. We basically have to let the robots do their own thing and just send them general instructions and pre-plan those things. So if anything unexpected happens, well, we can't really compensate for that, which could be kind of dangerous if we're trying something risky. But if we've got, a dude there, well, they can deal with things in real time. Now, of course, this isn't a trivial task. This is going to be, well, the hardest thing we've ever done technologically. But there is some estimation that within the next decade or possibly 2 decades, we should be able to send our first exploration vessel out there. They'll likely transit and then stick around for about a year and a bit, possibly 2 years, and then come back on the next orbital window that we can do a transfer fairly easily. But the question is why? Why do we want to go to Mars? For that matter, why do we want to explore space in the first place? Aren't there more important problems to solve here on Earth? Shouldn't we be dedicating our resources to that? Isn't this just a waste of time and resources that we could be better spending elsewise? But I disagree with this logic, for the reason that it's not an either-or proposition. It's not like the stuff that we spend on space, not like the efforts that we put into sending rockets to Mars takes away directly from our efforts here on Earth. It's not as if the homelessness problem, the poverty problem, the starvation problem is all caused by the lack of resources that we're spending that are being dedicated instead to space travel. No, I think those problems are actually caused by something else entirely. Yes, many of the problems that we have here on Earth are the result of misallocation of resources, but it's not the allocation of resources to space travel that's the problem. If anything, space exploration takes a tiny, minuscule amount of our resources and doesn't actually directly take away those resources from other more important things. They're two separate entities and two separate endeavors. What this misappropriation of resources is actually going to is, well, enriching the luxury of the wealthy, enriching the pocketbooks of those who own all the means of production, the military-industrial complex, the ultra-riche who love their yachts and their caviar and all that other stuff. The problems that we're experiencing here on Earth, they're structural rather than some matter of allocating resources. We spend so much of our effort on complete waste. We create junk that's completely useless because, well, it makes money to create that junk. And we misallocate resources like food such that the people that need it, if they can't afford it, those resources are just wasted. They're literally thrown out rather than being given to the people that need it but don't have the money to pay for it. If we changed the way that our society was organized in that way, well, we could eliminate those problems without any issue at all. We have the resources, we have the technology to be able to feed and clothe and house everyone, and if we really worked at it, we could solve the climate change issue. But instead of that, well, we need to think of the economy. The thing people making this argument forget is that money is not a real thing. It's something that we created. We're the authors of this collective fiction, and if we wanted to change it, well, we can. All we need to do is collectively decide to do things differently. The same economic logic that we overwhelmingly use here on Earth doesn't really apply to space travel. We see things in terms of returns on investment in the short term only. So when we invest in space travel, there's no obvious return on that investment. Nobody's actually directly making money from sending people to Mars and doing science and learning things about Mars. So, well, by that logic, there's no point in doing it because, well, nobody's going to make any money that way. Yes, other than the contractors and the scientists and the people that are actually making these Mars rockets, yes, that is some form of economic activity, but that's not really entering into the equation. The return on these kind of investments is much, much longer term. The science that we gather, the research, the technology that we gain from doing these sorts of experiments, these sorts of projects, well, it has huge impact for the human race's ability to survive the universe. We may not see it within our lifetimes, but we may need these technologies for what comes next. The technologies that were developed just to get people to the moon and back, well, those have been adapted and used in everyday life of today. There's many industries that owe their existence to the moon program and various other space endeavors of the last couple of decades. And each time we endeavor on something that's this difficult, our technology capacity just stretches, and it makes anything that's less difficult than that extremely difficult endeavor more easy by comparison. As we develop the technology for people to live on Mars, these technologies could become quite useful here on Earth. As our biosphere starts to decay in the coming years, these technologies for habitation in extreme environments could be pretty handy. We will be able to use the same food production technologies, the same atmosphere and water remediation technologies, and a lot of the same material technologies to be able to survive the rapidly changing climate of Earth. And for that matter, as we learn how Mars changed and how the climate of Venus, for that matter, changed, we could use that to apply to Earth's climate and hopefully be able to make remedial efforts in terms of increasing the habitability of Earth. In broader terms, some scientists have been calling for us moving out into the cosmos as a way of ensuring the survival of the human race. Basically, by settling Mars, this creates for us a backup for human civilization, so that if anything really bad happens to Earth, well, there's still some humans available on Mars to, well, continue on, to carry on after what bad thing has happened here. Now, of course, it's unlikely that anything's going to completely wipe us out here on Earth, but, it's not impossible, and this seems like a wise idea. If not simply for the survival of the human race, but really to just start the process of moving out into the cosmos. Because really, if humanity is to survive, if we are to persist on beyond the terrestrial age, we're going to need to start at some point. We're going to need to start making our moves out into the solar system as the solar age begins. So the sooner Mars reaches a viable population, and the sooner the technology reaches maturity, the sooner we can get started on this thing. But of course, this is not a simple affair, and it's not without its problems. Mars is a lot less habitable than science fiction makes it seem. There are problems in terraforming and even in just living there that are pretty difficult to solve. For one, the soil is full of molecules called perchlorates. They're pretty toxic. They're basically impossible to deal with at this point, at least not in any technology form that we currently are aware of. So that's something we're going to need to really look into. That dust is downright dangerous, and it's going to be an inconvenience for any colonists, for any people that end up there for any length of time. Arguably even worse than that, Mars has no radiation shielding from stellar radiation. Earth has this lovely magnetic field that surrounds the planet, creates the northern lights, and protects us from solar radiation, solar wind that would otherwise be quite deadly. And this field is generated by the spinning molten core of the Earth, generating a huge magnetic field. Mars's core, well, it's frozen. It doesn't rotate. It doesn't generate a magnetic field. So any of that stellar radiation that shows up, there's nothing to stop it. And this is why there's very little atmosphere on the planet. So any astronauts that end up on the Martian surface are going to have to deal with this incredibly intense radiation raining down on them all the time. Of course, we can always build some shielding to our bases. We can build them underground or within volcanoes, or even just having very heavy shielding of water around our bases. But even still, this is going to be a long-term problem that is going to get in the way of easy colonization. But even if we deal with the technological problems, the practical problems, well, there's going to be political and economic problems that go along with the settlement of Mars. Elon Musk has been talking about building a Mars settlement sometime in the next little while, and that freaks me out a bit, because if it ends up being a privately owned, corporate-driven settlement, well, you basically end up with a company town in the style of Middle America. In a company town, the mining company or whatever other industry that owns the industry in the town itself, they end up basically controlling everything. They control the economy by printing their own currency. They have all their own stores in which that is the only place that you can get your supplies from. And basically you're trapped in some form of indentured servitude. Because, well, you don't have enough money to leave the town, but you owe everything to the company that owns the town. And so yes, Elon Musk, in his classic style of proposing things that are known to be bad ideas, has effectively proposed some form of indentured servitude for early Mars colonists that aren't already wealthy. This is, well, it's bad. If we're not careful, this is basically interplanetary colonialism. Yet another stage of hierarchical, patriarchal, forceful economic dominance of now another planet. It's going to end poorly, and no democracy will be possible past that point. If the same rules of economics and acquisition and private ownership end up traveling over to Mars, This could ruin the potential for any sort of utopic civilization on another planet. This is the opportunity, however, to change the way we do civilization. When we settle a new planet with a brand new set of rules and a brand new way of life, we could actually change it for the better. We could decide to run things differently in a more democratic, egalitarian way. Rather than being run by whoever has the most toys, whoever has the private ownership of the corporation that owns the town, well, it could be run democratically. It could be owned by the people that actually live there. There is already an international treaty on space which prevents the wholesale ownership of any stellar body by a private entity or by any sort of sovereign state. But it's very easy to step around that treaty, and I fear a time when this treaty's validity is even challenged and or overruled as private interest starts to want to own asteroids in order to mine them, or own territory on various bodies in order to colonize them. I don't want that to happen. I would much rather the solar system remain a free and democratic place. Now, I'm a big fan of science fiction. I find it to be the most useful genre for thinking through contemporary issues because it sets in allegory contemporary issues that we can consider in a different way. Kim Stanley Robinson's Red Mars trilogy is, well, it's obviously pretty practically useful in this respect. In the story, a scientific expedition is eventually sent to Mars, and then over time it grows into a planetary civilization. And of course, there's many competing interests that show up on Mars. All the various transnational corporations and many of the national governments of Earth end up sending their own expeditions, their own settlements, and their own people. But on Mars, the increasing distance between Earth and Mars and the increasing political tensions eventually give way to, well, revolution. Unwilling to be the pawns of Earth's transnational corporations and capitalism, the people of Mars end up banding together, resisting the Earth overlords and throwing them out. And then, well, begins an extensive process of negotiation. They have a summit. They bring together all of the major leaders of Mars and discuss a constitution that ensures the freedom and the liberty of the Martian people. If we are to have an egalitarian outcome for Martian settlement, or for that matter moving out into the solar system, it's this kind of negotiation that's going to be necessary. We'll need to get together and have a cooperative agreement. But that requires a spirit of cooperation, which is not something that we've been very capable of doing lately, it seems. So in other words, in order to get a democratic Mars, we're going to need a democratic Earth. We're going to need to basically overturn our existing system of social organization. Gone will have to be this capitalist, plutocratic organization that puts all the power in the hands of the people with all the money. We'll need actual democratic, egalitarian ways of organizing humanity in order to have an egalitarian, humanitarian way of organizing the solar system. And this leads us to one of the other values of space exploration. It's an inspiration. It's a way of looking at the world that renders us as the tiny little creatures suspended on a mote of dust that we are. When the first astronauts looked back on their way to the moon and saw Earth suspended in the blackness of space, no borders visible, the insignificance of the human race, the insignificance of war, just flies out the window. Suddenly, you see a different way of existing. You see the vital interconnectedness of all humanity. You see the unimportance of these competitive, nasty ways of living that impair us. They hold us back from the way that we could be. They hold us back from the greatness that the human spirit could offer. We could be living in a solar age. We could live in a radically democratic, radically egalitarian society that spans the cosmos. But we need to decide it. We need to choose to go in that direction. Right now, we're on a terminal trajectory. We're heading towards a race to the bottom. We're going to consume and destroy all the resources of this planet, have no backup, and no intentions on surviving past the next quarter when profits are reported to our shareholders. This isn't a good way of living. The image of the blue marble is a landmark of human culture. It's the first time that we were able to see the planet as a whole, to see that every single human being who's ever lived or died, every war that's ever been fought, every country, every idea, every scheme has taken place on this tiny little ball suspended in the blackness of space. This is a powerful symbol of humanity. This is a powerful reminder of just how unimportant we are to the cosmos, but also how important we could be, how valuable humanity is as a rare, possibly even unique feature of the universe experiencing itself, reaching out. And so events like these, sending robots to Mars, well, that's a powerful reminder of this thing. We need to remember this on a daily basis to recognize just how insignificant and unimportant all this conflict is. Rather than being so desperate and selfish as to destroy resources that people can't pay for, why don't we just cooperate? Why don't we just work together? I would want to continue to survive. I want to enter the solar age in a unified way. I'd like to see the rest of the universe and go in peace. May it be so. Anyway, I make these videos daily, so if you enjoy this content, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel and maybe check out one of those. You might enjoy it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.